What if the greatest act of mercy in galactic history was also the most terrifying mistake? When the peaceful Volani Confederation sent out their desperate SOS signal, they expected their longtime allies to respond with medical ships and relief supplies. They never imagined their call for help would reach a species so dangerous that even their rescue missions looked like acts of war. The humans called it humanitarian aid. The rest of the galaxy called it the day the Deathworlders showed the universe what true power looked like when wrapped in compassion. This is the story of how a cry for help brought forth the most feared fleet in known space, and why the galaxy would never be the same. The emergency beacon cut through the void of space like a scream in the darkness. Ambassador Kithara of the Volani Confederation watched the transmission array with growing desperation as the signal pulsed outward, carrying their plea to any allied vessel within range. "How long until we receive a response?" she asked, her elegant blue fingers trembling against the control panel. The ambassador's usually pristine robes were stained with the dust and debris from the evacuation efforts, and her large, silver eyes reflected the chaos unfolding on the screens around them. Chief Communications Officer Vextai glanced up from his station, his expression grim. "The signal has reached the outer relay stations of the Zephyrian Empire and the Kathani Republic. Both should respond within 6 hours, assuming their fleets are in position." Kethara nodded, though her heart sank. 6 hours. They had maybe 3 before the plague reached the evacuation centers. The Crimson Death had appeared without warning 3 days ago. What started as isolated reports of a strange illness in the outer colonies had rapidly escalated into a full-scale biological disaster. The pathogen was unlike anything in their medical databases, aggressive, adaptable, and horrifyingly efficient. It consumed organic matter at the cellular level, leaving behind only a crystalline residue that glowed with an eerie red light. Entire cities had gone dark. Millions of Volani were dead, and millions more were fleeing toward the few remaining safe zones scattered across their 7 worlds. The Confederation's medical corps was overwhelmed, their scientists baffled, and their military stretched thin trying to maintain evacuation corridors. Ambassador, called out science advisor Nithur from across the command center, were receiving disturbing reports from the Helix station. The pathogen has mutated again. It's now capable of surviving in vacuum for extended periods. The blood drained from Kethara's face. If the Crimson Death could survive in space, it could spread to other star systems through debris, meteors, or contaminated vessels. This wasn't just a Confederation crisis anymore. It was a potential galactic catastrophe. "Send an updated distress signal," she ordered. "Include all biological data we've gathered. Mark it as a Class 1 extinction event. Authorization, Kethara 779. Vextai's hands flew over his controls. Signal updated and transmitted, Ambassador. Adding the extinction protocol should prioritize our request across all Allied networks." As the enhanced signal raced through subspace, carrying with it the desperate plea of a dying civilization, none of them could have imagined where it would end up. 3 sectors away, in a part of the galaxy that most civilized species had marked as hazardous, avoid contact. The signal was intercepted by a monitoring station that had been quietly listening to galactic communications for the past decade. The station was small, barely more than a cluster of sensor arrays and a single habitat module, but its technology was surprisingly advanced. Most importantly, it was completely automated except for one occupant, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist who had volunteered for the loneliest assignment in human space. Elena was in the middle of her morning coffee when the priority alert chimed through the station speakers. She nearly spilled the steaming cup as she rushed to the communications console, her dark eyes scanning the incoming data stream. "Jesus Christ," she whispered as the translation protocols kicked in and the Volani distress call appeared on her screen. The biological data that accompanied the message made her hands shake as she absorbed the implications. This wasn't just a local disaster. If the pathogen described in the Volani data was allowed to spread, It could potentially threaten every carbon-based life form in the galaxy. Elena had spent 15 years studying alien biology, and she'd never seen anything like this. Her fingers moved across the control panel with practiced efficiency. First, she opened a priority channel to Earth. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she opened channels to 3 other destinations: Mars Command, the Titan Research Facility, and, most significantly, the Proxima Centauri Battle Group. The message she transmitted was brief, but comprehensive. Priority Alpha Biological Hazard Alert. Potential extinction-level pathogen detected in Volani space. Immediate response required. All biological data attached. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Deep Space Monitoring Station 7, transmitting under Article 12 of the Terran Emergency Response Protocols. What Elena didn't fully understand was that by invoking Article 12, she had just authorized what humans called a humanitarian crisis response, a protocol that had never been used outside of human space. And for good reason. Back on Earth, Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun was reviewing routine patrol reports when her aide burst in her office without knocking. Commander Jackson's face was pale, and he held a data pad with trembling hands. "Admiral, we have a priority Alpha alert from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. Dr. Vasquez is reporting a potential extinction event in the Volani sector." Chun looked up sharply. She knew Elena Vasquez by reputation. The woman was brilliant, cautious, and not given to false alarms. If she was invoking priority Alpha protocols, the situation was genuinely dire. "Show me the data," Chun ordered, extending her hand for the pad. As she read through the biological analysis and the Volani distress calls, Admiral Chun's expression grew increasingly serious. The pathogen described in the reports was beyond anything they'd encountered, but that wasn't what worried her most. What worried her was the rate of spread and the potential for it to jump to other species. Humanity had learned hard lessons about biological threats. The Mumbai plague of 2157 had killed 40 million people before they'd managed to contain it. The Titan virus outbreak in 2203 had come within days of sterilizing the solar system. They'd sworn never to let such horrors spread unchecked again, anywhere in the galaxy. "Commander," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command, "activate Protocol 77 Alpha. Full humanitarian deployment. I want every available medical ship, research vessel, and support craft ready for immediate departure." Jackson's eyes widened. "Ma'am, Protocol 77 Alpha authorizes military escort for humanitarian missions. That would mean deploying battle groups alongside the medical fleet." "Correct. If this pathogen is as dangerous as Dr. Vasquez believes, our medical teams will need protection from potential panic, quarantine enforcement, and God knows what else. We're not sending our people into a biological hell without adequate support." "Understood, Admiral. How many battle groups should I assign to escort duty?" Chun looked at the data again, noting the speed of the pathogen's spread and the size of the affected population. "All of them, Commander. Every ship we have that can make the journey. If we're going to save the Volani Confederation, we're going to do it properly." As Commander Jackson hurried to implement the Admiral's orders, neither of them fully grasped what they were about to unleash upon the galaxy. The human response fleet that began assembling over the next several hours was unlike anything that had ever been deployed for a rescue mission. At its core were 12 massive hospital ships, each capable of treating millions of patients and manufacturing medical supplies on an industrial scale. Surrounding them were 42 research vessels packed with the finest scientific minds humanity could muster, along with every piece of biological analysis equipment they could fit aboard. But it was the escort fleet that would have terrified any galactic observer. 18 battle groups, each centered around a kilometer-long dreadnought and supported by dozens of cruisers, destroyers, and support craft. Nearly 300 warships in total, all bristling with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand stellar flares. To humanity, it was simply standard operating procedure. When you sent medical teams into a potentially hostile environment, you made sure they were properly protected, When you were dealing with an extinction-level biological threat, you brought enough firepower to enforce quarantine protocols if necessary. To the rest of the galaxy, it would look like an invasion force. Meanwhile, in Volani space, the situation continued to deteriorate. The Crimson Death had now claimed 5 of their 7 worlds, and the remaining populations were crammed into increasingly desperate refugee camps on the 2 planets that remained uninfected. Ambassador Kithara stood on the observation deck of the orbital station above Velan Prime, watching as streams of evacuation ships rose from the planet's surface. Each vessel carried thousands of refugees, but there were millions more waiting their turn. Time was running out. Any response from our allies? She asked without turning around. The Zephyrians acknowledge our distress call, but say their medical ships are occupied with their own outbreak in the rim sectors, replied her aide. The Kathani have offered to send supply ships, but they estimate a 2-week arrival time. 2 weeks. They'd all be dead in 2 weeks. Kethara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her species' fate pressing down upon her shoulders. She had sent the distress call to save her people, but now it seemed like nothing more than a final gesture, a message in a bottle cast into the cosmic void. She had no way of knowing that her message had been heard by beings who considered the impossible merely challenging, and who had turned the art of rescue into a science of overwhelming force. The human fleet was 12 hours from departure when the first long-range scouts detected something that made Admiral Chun pause her final preparations. Long-range sensors were picking up massive gravitic distortions in the direction of Volani space. Not from the pathogen, but from something else entirely. "What are we looking at, Commander Park?" she asked the sensor officer. Park frowned at his displays, running the readings through multiple analysis programs. "It's difficult to tell at this range, Admiral, but the gravitational signatures suggest large-scale industrial activity. Massive energy expenditures consistent with—" He paused, double-checking his readings. "Consistent with stellar engineering projects or megastructure construction." Admiral Chun felt a chill run down her spine. Stellar engineering in an active plague zone could mean only one thing. Someone was preparing to sterilize the entire system rather than risk the pathogen spreading. "Double our escort strength," she ordered grimly. "If someone's planning to glass the Volani worlds, we're going to have a problem." As the human fleet made its final preparations for departure, similar preparations were underway in another part of the galaxy. The hegemony of Ash had been monitoring the Volani situation with growing alarm, and their solution was characteristically direct. Supreme Commander Vorthe K stood before the tactical display in his flagship's command center, studying the progression of the Crimson Death with clinical detachment. The hegemony had encountered similar biological threats before, and their response was always the same: total sterilization. "How many stellar bombardment platforms will we need?" he asked his tactical officer. "Analysis suggests 12 platforms will be sufficient to achieve complete sterilization of all 7 Volani worlds, Supreme Commander. The gravitational focusing arrays are already being positioned." Vortak nodded. It was regrettable that an entire species would be lost, but sometimes harsh measures were necessary to preserve the greater galactic community. The hegemony had earned their position as one of the major powers precisely because they were willing to make such difficult decisions. "Begin charging the stellar arrays. I want full sterilization capability ready within 18 hours. What neither the humans nor the hegemony realized was that they were about to arrive in Volani space at almost exactly the same time, each with their own idea of how to handle the crisis. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be truly powerful and what it meant to be truly merciful. As the human fleet entered hyperspace and the hegemony platforms moved into position, Ambassador Kethura continued her vigil over the dying worlds of her people, unaware that help was coming from the most unexpected source, and that salvation might arrive wearing the face of destruction. The first sign that something extraordinary was approaching Volani space came from the automated deep space sensors positioned at the edge of the system. The readings were so unusual that the monitoring station's computer systems flagged them as equipment malfunctions 3 times before finally accepting the data as accurate. Chief Sensor Operator Yithel stared at her displays with growing confusion. Ambassador, I'm detecting massive hyperspace distortions approaching our system. The energy signatures are unprecedented. Ambassador Kethara looked up from the refugee coordination reports she'd been reviewing. After 60 hours of continuous crisis management, she could barely keep her eyes open, but something in Yithel's tone cut through her exhaustion. Define unprecedented, she said, moving to stand behind the sensor operator's station. The hyperspace displacement suggests a fleet of enormous size, possibly 300 vessels or more. But that's not the strange part. Yithel manipulated her controls, bringing up a 3-dimensional representation of the incoming fleet. The energy signatures don't match any known propulsion system in our databases. They're generating power levels that should theoretically tear their ships apart. Kethara felt her heart skip a beat. 300 ships was larger than most galactic navies. If this was some kind of invasion force taking advantage of their weakened state, the Confederation's remaining defenses wouldn't last 10 minutes. Time until arrival? She asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. At current velocity, approximately 4 hours. Ambassador, there's something else. I'm also detecting separate energy signatures from the opposite vector, smaller in number, but exhibiting the gravitational distortions consistent with stellar bombardment platforms. The blood drained from Kethara's face. Stellar bombardment platforms. Someone was planning to sterilize their entire system rather than risk the Crimson Death spreading. It made tactical sense from a galactic security standpoint, but it meant the death of every living thing in 7 worlds. Send an emergency transmission to both fleets, she ordered. Full diplomatic protocols. Inform them that we are dealing with a medical emergency and request humanitarian assistance, not military intervention. As Yithel began transmitting, neither she nor the ambassador could have imagined the chaos their simple request was about to cause. Aboard the human dreadnought Terra's Hope, Admiral Sarachon was reviewing the final mission briefings when the Villani transmission arrived. Her communications officer, Lieutenant Torres, looked up from her station with obvious confusion. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Villani Confederation. They're requesting humanitarian assistance and asking us to identify ourselves. Chen raised an eyebrow. They don't know who we are? Apparently not, ma'am. The message is addressed to Unknown Fleet Alpha and includes what appears to be a standard first contact diplomatic package. Admiral Chun felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. In all their planning for the humanitarian mission, they had somehow overlooked one crucial detail. The Villani had never heard of humanity. She turned to her xenocultural advisor, Dr. Marcus Webb, who was already pulling up files on his personal tablet. Doctor, what do we know about human contact with the Villani Confederation? Webb's expression was grim as he reviewed the data. According to our records, we've had 0 direct contact with the Villani. All our information about them comes from secondhand sources through the galactic trade networks. From their perspective, we're a completely unknown species arriving in their space with the largest fleet they've probably ever seen. In the middle of a biological crisis that's killing their people, Chin added with growing concern. They're going to think we're either invaders or scavengers. It gets worse, Admiral. I'm detecting another fleet in the system, hegemony of Ash configuration. If they're deploying stellar bombardment platforms, they're planning to sterilize the entire system. Chin closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process the situation. They had come to save lives, but their very presence might be interpreted as a hostile act. Meanwhile, another power was apparently preparing to commit genocide to contain the biological threat. All right, she said finally. Lieutenant Torres, prepare a response transmission. Full diplomatic protocols, and make sure to lead with our peaceful intentions. Dr. Webb, I need you to draft a comprehensive explanation of why we're here and what we're planning to do. Make it clear that we're responding to their distress call as a humanitarian mission. Aye, Admiral. Should I mention the hegemony fleet? Chen considered for a moment. Yes, but carefully. We don't want to seem like we're taking sides in some conflict we don't understand. As the human fleet prepared their response, the situation was becoming equally tense aboard the hegemony flagship Inevitable Judgment. Supreme Commander Vortha K studied the sensor readings with growing irritation. The unknown fleet was massive, well-armed, and approaching the contaminated system at high speed. Worse, their technology was completely unfamiliar, which suggested they were from outside the established galactic community. Analysis of the unknown vessels, he demanded from his intelligence officer. Commander Hestai consulted his displays. Limited data available, Supreme Commander. Their ships appear to be heavily armed, but also include numerous large vessels with configurations consistent with hospital or research ships. Energy signatures suggest extremely advanced technology. Hospital ships? Vortha K's expression darkened. Are they planning to attempt treatment of the biological contamination? That appears to be a possibility, Supreme Commander. Vortha K slammed his fist against the armrest of his command chair. Fools! Any attempt to treat this pathogen risks its spread to other systems. The only safe response is complete sterilization. He turned to his communications officer. Open a channel to the unknown fleet. Inform them that this system has been declared a biological hazard zone under Hegemony Directive 772. Any attempt to interfere with our containment protocols will be considered an act of war. As both fleets transmitted their messages, Ambassador Kethara found herself in the impossible position of trying to mediate between two unknown powers, each with radically different ideas about how to handle her people's crisis. The human response arrived first, and Kethara felt a surge of hope as she read through the translation. The beings calling themselves humans claimed to be responding to the Confederation's distress call with medical assistance. Their message included detailed proposals for quarantine protocols, biological research initiatives, and refugee treatment programs. But then the hegemony transmission arrived, and her hope turned to ice-cold terror. The message was brief and utterly uncompromising. Surrender for immediate sterilization, or be sterilized along with the pathogen. Ythel, she said urgently, patch me through to both fleets simultaneously. Emergency diplomatic override. As the channel opened, Kethara found herself speaking to representatives of two civilizations she'd never heard of, each apparently convinced they had the right solution to her people's crisis. The human admiral appeared on one side of her screen, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and intelligent brown eyes that radiated both competence and compassion. On the other side was the hegemony commander, a tall, angular being whose species she didn't recognize, but whose expression conveyed nothing but cold determination. I am Ambassador Kithara of the Villani Confederation, she began, grateful that the translation protocols were functioning properly. I thank you both for responding to our distress call, but I must inform you that we face a biological crisis that requires immediate humanitarian assistance, not military intervention. Admiral Chen spoke first. Ambassador, I'm Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Colonial Navy. We've analyzed the biological data included in your distress call, and we're here to provide medical assistance and research support. Our fleet includes hospital ships capable of treating millions of patients, as well as research vessels equipped to analyze and hopefully develop countermeasures against this pathogen. Supreme Commander Vortha K's response was immediate and harsh. Admiral Chun, I am Supreme Commander Vortha K of the Hegemony Second Fleet. Your proposed intervention is not only futile, but dangerous. This pathogen represents an existential threat to galactic civilization. The only acceptable response is immediate and complete sterilization. With respect, Commander, Chen replied, her voice remaining calm despite the tension. Sterilization should be a last resort. We have extensive experience dealing with biological threats, and we believe this situation can be contained without the loss of innocent life. Your extensive experience is irrelevant. The hegemony has protocols for exactly this type of situation. Any attempt to interfere with our sterilization procedures will be met with appropriate force. Ambassador Kethara watched the exchange with growing horror. Not only were her people dying from the Crimson Death, but now they were caught between two alien fleets with completely opposing philosophies about how to save them. "Please," she interjected, "surely there must be some way to coordinate your efforts. The humans offer hope for a cure, while the hegemony offers certainty of containment. Could we not attempt the medical solution first, with sterilization held as a fallback option?" Vorthake's expression grew even colder. "Unacceptable. Every moment of delay increases the risk of pathogen spread. Sterilization begins in 6 hours." Admiral Chen's jaw tightened. "Commander Vorthake, I cannot allow you to commit genocide while there's still hope for a medical solution. I'm ordering you to delay your sterilization protocols pending our assessment of the situation. You are in no position to give me orders, human. This system falls under hegemony jurisdiction for biological containment. Your interference will be treated as an act of war." The communication channel closed with an ominous finality, leaving Ambassador Kethara staring at Admiral Chen's image on her screen. "Admiral," she said quietly, "do you truly believe your people can find a cure for the Crimson Death?" Chen's expression was honest and determined. "I don't know, Ambassador, but I know we have to try. My species has a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We won't stand by and watch genocide when there's even a chance of finding another way." As the communication ended, both fleets began their final preparations. The humans deployed their medical and research vessels in defensive formations, protected by rings of warships that bristled with weapons technology the galaxy had never seen. The hegemony forces moved their stellar bombardment platforms into final position, their gravitational focusing arrays beginning to charge with the power needed to ignite suns. On the Vallani world below, the Crimson Death continued its relentless advance. Entire continents had gone dark, their populations either dead or fled. The pathogen had begun adapting to new environments, showing signs of intelligence that terrified even the human scientists reviewing the data. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had first detected the Vallani distress call, now found herself aboard the research vessel Pasteur, leading a team of xenobiologists in their race against time. The samples of the Crimson Death that had been transmitted in the original data were unlike anything in human experience. "It's not just a pathogen," she explained to her research team as they worked frantically to understand the organism. "It's showing signs of technological integration. Look at these cellular structures. They're incorporating silicon-based components along with the organic material. It's like it's building something." Her assistant, Dr. James Park, looked up from his microscope with confusion. "Building what?" "I don't know, but the pattern suggests some kind of communication network. If I'm right, this isn't just a disease, it's an information system that happens to be lethal to organic life." The implications were staggering. If the Crimson Death was some kind of technological organism, it might be possible to communicate with it, to find a way to coexist rather than simply destroy it. But time was running out. The hegemony platforms were nearly charged, and their deadline was approaching fast. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope, watching the tactical display as both fleets maneuvered for position. The hegemony had made it clear they considered the human presence an act of war, but she couldn't simply abandon the Vallani to genocide. "Admiral," called out her tactical officer, Commander Sarah Park, "the hegemony platforms are beginning their final charging sequence. If they maintain current power levels, they'll be ready to fire in approximately 90 minutes. Our defensive posture, all battle groups are in position to protect the medical fleet. However, Admiral, I have to point out that we're significantly outnumbered. The hegemony has 47 capital ships and 12 bombardment platforms. We have superior firepower per vessel, but they have numerical advantage." Chen nodded grimly. She had hoped it wouldn't come to open warfare, but the hegemony seemed determined to proceed with their sterilization plan. "All ships, This is Admiral Chun. We are now at Condition Red. Our mission remains unchanged. Protect the medical fleet and prevent genocide. All vessels are authorized to engage if fired upon, but do not initiate hostilities. We're here to save lives, not take them. As the two fleets faced each other across the void, the fate of an entire species hung in the balance. The humans had brought the largest rescue fleet in their history. The hegemony had brought the power to sterilize worlds. And caught between them were the Villani, dying by the millions while their would-be saviors prepared for war. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of the Villani Confederation, but the future relationship between three civilizations that had never met before this moment of crisis. In the depths of space, ancient mechanisms were stirring. The Crimson Death was more than anyone had realized, and its true purpose was about to be revealed. The breakthrough came at the worst possible moment. Dr. Elena Vasquez was deep in analysis of the Crimson Death's cellular structure when her equipment began registering impossible readings. The pathogen samples weren't just showing technological integration. They were actively communicating with something beyond the laboratory. "James, are you seeing this?" she called to her assistant, her voice tight with excitement and fear. Dr. Park rushed to her station, his eyes widening as he absorbed the data streaming across her displays. "Elena, those are organized transmission patterns. The pathogen is sending and receiving data through quantum entanglement channels." "More than that," Elena said, her fingers flying across her controls as she traced the communication pathways. "It's not just transmitting randomly. Look at the pattern recognition algorithms. It's learning from our medical responses, adapting its behavior in real time based on our treatment attempts." The implications hit both scientists simultaneously. The Crimson Death wasn't just a pathogen or even a technological organism. It was an intelligence, and it had been systematically studying every species it encountered. "We need to contact Admiral Chun immediately," Elena said, reaching for her communications panel. But before she could open a channel, alarms began blaring throughout the research vessel. On the bridge of Terra's Hope, Admiral Chun was receiving multiple priority alerts simultaneously. The hegemony fleet had begun moving into attack formation, their stellar bombardment platforms reaching critical charge levels. But that wasn't the most alarming development. "Admiral," called Commander Torres from the communication station, "we're receiving massive data transmissions from all 7 Villani worlds. The quantum signature matches the pathogen samples our research teams have been studying." Admiral Chun felt a chill run down her spine. "The pathogen is transmitting?" "Yes, ma'am. And not just randomly. The transmissions appear to be directed towards specific points in deep space. We're tracking at least 17 different destination vectors." Before Chun could respond, Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled over the ship's communication system. "Admiral, this is Dr. Vasquez aboard the Pasteur. We have an emergency discovery. The Crimson Death is not a pathogen. It's a reconnaissance probe, and it's been reporting back to its creators." The tactical situation had just become infinitely more complex. Not only were they facing potential genocide from the hegemony, but they now had evidence that the biological crisis might be the work of an unknown alien intelligence. "Dr. Vasquez," Chun responded, "are you saying this entire plague is artificial?" "More than artificial, Admiral. It's a sophisticated information-gathering system designed to study and catalog biological species. Every person it's infected, every adaptation it's made, all of that data has been transmitted to somewhere else in the galaxy." Admiral Chun closed her eyes for a moment, processing the implications. If Dr. Vasquez was correct, then the Villani weren't just victims of a plague. They were specimens being studied by an unknown alien power. And if that power was hostile, the data being gathered could be used to develop weapons against every species the pathogen had encountered. "Commander Park," she called her tactical officer, long-range sensor sweep. "I want to know if anything else is approaching this system." As the sensors reached out into deep space, they detected something that made the situation even more dire. Massive energy signatures were approaching from 3 different directions, all following the vectors that the pathogen had been transmitting to. Admiral, Park reported, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. I'm detecting multiple fleets approaching our position. Estimated arrival time, 4 hours. Fleet composition, unknown. Energy signatures don't match any known technology in our databases. Chen realized they were about to face not just the hegemony's sterilization fleet, but potentially the creators of the Crimson Death itself. Meanwhile, aboard the hegemony flagship Inevitable Judgment, Supreme Commander Vorthe K was receiving similar sensor reports. His intelligence officer, Commander HFY, looked up from his station with obvious concern. Supreme Commander, our deep space sensors are detecting incoming vessels. Multiple fleets, unknown configuration, approaching from vectors consistent with the biological contamination's transmission patterns. Vorthe K studied the tactical display with growing unease. The situation had evolved from a simple containment operation to a potential multi-species conflict. The unknown human fleet was bad enough, but now they were facing the possibility that the biological agent had been deliberately deployed by a hostile power. Status of the bombardment platforms? He demanded. Charging sequence at 97%. We can achieve sterilization protocols in 37 minutes. Vorthe K weighed his options. The approaching fleets suggested that the biological contamination was indeed artificial, which meant that sterilizing the system might not be enough to contain the threat. But it would at least prevent the unknown power from retrieving whatever data they had gathered from the Volani population. Accelerate the charging sequence. I want those platforms ready to fire in 20 minutes. Supreme Commander HFY said hesitantly, the human fleet has positioned itself between us and the contaminated worlds. Any bombardment will require us to engage them first. Then that's what we'll do. The security of the galaxy takes precedence over diplomatic niceties. As both fleets prepared for conflict, Ambassador Kethura was dealing with revelations that threatened to shatter her understanding of the crisis. Dr. Vasquez had shared her research findings with the Volani scientists, and the implications were staggering. You're saying that our people weren't just infected, they were studied? She asked, her voice barely containing her rage. Dr. Vasquez's image on the communication screen was sympathetic but firm. I'm afraid so, Ambassador. The Crimson Death has been systematically cataloging your species' biology, psychology, and technology. Every infected individual has become a source of data that's being transmitted to whoever created this organism. Ambassador Kethura felt sick. Millions of her people had died, not as victims in natural disaster, but as unwilling subjects in some alien experiment. The very idea was almost too monstrous to comprehend. Can this transmission be stopped? She asked. We're working on that. The organism uses quantum entanglement for communication, which makes it difficult to interrupt. But we think we've identified the transmission nodes. If we can isolate them, Ambassador, interrupted Chief Sensor Operator Yethel, I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the hegemony platforms. They're preparing to fire. Kethura realized that her people were about to be caught in the middle of a 3-way conflict. The humans were trying to save them, the hegemony was trying to sterilize them, and unknown alien fleets were approaching with unclear intentions. Dr. Vasquez, she said urgently, how long do you need to stop the transmissions? At least 6 hours for a complete shutdown. But, Ambassador, there's something else. We think the organism might be intelligent enough to negotiate with. If we can establish communication, we might be able to convince it to leave peacefully. The hegemony won't wait 6 hours. They're preparing to destroy our worlds in minutes. Dr. Vasquez's expression was grim. Then we need to buy time. And that might mean fighting. Aboard Terra's Hope, Admiral Chun was making the hardest decision of her career. The approaching unknown fleets suggested that they were facing a much larger threat than just the biological pathogen. But she couldn't allow the hegemony to commit genocide while there was still hope for a peaceful solution. All ships, this is Admiral Chun. We are now at Condition Black. Our primary mission remains the protection of the Volani population. Secondary mission is to prevent the transmission of biological data to unknown hostile forces. All vessels are authorized to engage any threat to either objective. The human fleet began moving into defensive positions around the Volani worlds. The massive hospital ships took shelter behind the protective screens of destroyers and cruisers, while the dreadnoughts moved to intercept the hegemony bombardment platforms. Admiral, called Commander Park from Tactical, the hegemony platforms are approaching firing position. If they achieve optimal range, our defensive screens won't be sufficient to protect the inhabited worlds. Then, we don't let them achieve optimal range. All dreadnoughts target the bombardment platforms. Disable if possible, destroy if necessary. The first shots of the battle were fired by the hegemony forces. Supreme Commander Vorthe K had decided that the human fleet represented too great a threat to his sterilization mission, and he ordered a preemptive strike against the nearest human vessels. The hegemony's weapons were impressive. Coherent plasma beams that could melt through most known materials and gravitational disruptors that could tear apart the molecular structure of enemy ships. But they had never faced human military technology. The human shields didn't just absorb the incoming fire. They redirected it, using advanced electromagnetic fields to channel the energy into their own weapon systems. When the human ships returned fire, their responses were devastatingly effective. Human weapons have been designed with one principle in mind: overwhelming superiority. Their particle beam cannons could punch through any known armor, while their missile systems used artificial intelligence to adapt to enemy countermeasures in real time. The first exchange lasted only 30 seconds, but the results were shocking to both sides. The hegemony lost 3 capital ships and had 2 bombardment platforms severely damaged. The humans suffered only minor damage to their shields. Impossible, whispered Commander Hestai aboard the inevitable judgment. Their technology is centuries ahead of anything in our databases. Supreme Commander Vorthe K stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human fleet was smaller than his forces, but their technological superiority was so complete that numbers seemed irrelevant. All ships concentrate fire on the human dreadnoughts, if we can eliminate their primary combatants. But before he could complete his order, new contacts appeared on the sensor displays. The unknown fleets that had been approaching the system were dropping out of hyperspace, and their arrival changed everything. The first fleet to arrive was unlike anything any of the combatants had ever seen. The ships were enormous, each vessel easily 5 kilometers in length and covered with structures that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. There were only 12 ships in the fleet, but their energy signatures suggested power levels that dwarfed both the human and hegemony forces combined. Admiral Chun watched the sensor readings with growing apprehension. Analysis of the new contacts. Unknown technology. Admiral. Their ships appear to be partially biological, and they're not using any propulsion system we can identify. They're just moving through space without apparent effort. The second fleet arrived moments later, dropping out of hyperspace on the opposite side of the system. These ships were more recognizable in design. Sleek, metallic vessels that radiated the cold efficiency of advanced artificial intelligence. There were hundreds of them, ranging from small scouts to massive command ships. But it was the third fleet that caused the most alarm. They didn't drop out of hyperspace at all. They simply appeared as if they had been teleported directly into the system. Their ships defied every known law of physics, existing as geometric impossibilities that hurt to look at directly. 3 unknown fleets, reported Commander Park. Total vessel count, over 400 ships, all of unknown origin and capability. Admiral Chen realized that they were no longer dealing with a simple humanitarian crisis or even a conflict over containment protocols. They were facing what appeared to be a convergence of galactic powers, all drawn to the Volani system by the biological data transmissions. Open channels to all fleets, she ordered. Time to find out what we're really dealing with. The response came simultaneously from all three unknown fleets, but not in any language or communication format that any of the participants recognized. Instead, the message was transmitted directly into the consciousness of every intelligent being in the system. The message was simple but chilling. The harvest is complete. Comply or be consumed. Ambassador Kithara felt the alien thoughts pressing against her mind, carrying with them a weight of malevolence that made her physically ill. The Crimson Death hadn't been studying her people for scientific purposes. It had been preparing them for something far worse. Across the system, on ships belonging to three different civilizations, the same realization was dawning. The biological crisis had been a prelude to invasion, and now the real enemy had revealed itself. The humans had come to save lives. The hegemony had come to prevent catastrophe. But what had actually arrived was a threat that none of them had imagined, and stopping it would require them to work together or face extinction. The true battle for the Villani system was about to begin. The moment the alien thought message finished echoing through every mind in the system, Admiral Sarachun made a decision that would alter the course of galactic history. Instead of responding to the unknown fleets with hostility, she opened communication channels to every vessel in the Villani system: human, hegemony, Villani, and the three unknown alien fleets. This is Admiral Sarachun of the Terran Colonial Navy. I'm transmitting on all frequencies and through all available communication protocols. Whatever conflict brought us here is now irrelevant. We face a common threat that appears to view all of our species as expendable resources. I propose an immediate ceasefire and coordination of our defensive efforts. The response from Supreme Commander Vorthake came first, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Human, your interference has allowed this catastrophe to develop. The proper response was immediate sterilization. Commander, Chen replied evenly. Sterilization wouldn't have stopped this. The biological agent was already transmitting data beyond this system. Destroying the Villani worlds would have only eliminated witnesses, not the threat. Before Vorthake could respond, Ambassador Kethara's voice joined the conversation. Admiral Chun is correct. Our analysis shows that the pathogen began transmitting data within hours of its first appearance. The damage was already done before any of us arrived. The alien fleets had remained silent during this exchange, but their ships were moving into formation around the Villani worlds with obvious hostile intent. Dr. Vasquez's voice suddenly crackled over the communication network from a research vessel. Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy buildups from all three alien fleets. They're preparing to deploy some kind of collection mechanism. If I'm reading the patterns correctly, they're not planning to destroy the Villani. They're planning to harvest them. The implication sent chills through every listener. The Crimson Death hadn't been designed to kill the Villani population. It had been designed to process them for collection by their creators. Admiral Chen's tactical training took over. All human vessels, implement Protocol 99 Alpha. Full defensive deployment. Priority is protection of civilian populations. She paused, then added, Supreme Commander Vorthake, I'm transmitting our tactical analysis to your fleet. Your bombardment platforms could be crucial in disrupting their collection operations. For a long moment, there was silence on the communication channel. Then, Vorthake's voice returned, heavy with reluctant respect. Your analysis is comprehensive, Admiral. The hegemony accepts temporary alliance. Our platforms will target their collection mechanisms. What followed was the most unusual military coordination in galactic history. Three species that had never worked together before began combining their fleets into a unified defensive force, all while racing to understand an enemy that operated on principles they could barely comprehend. The first alien fleet, the one with the massive biomechanical ships, began the harvest operation by deploying what could only be described as living nets. Enormous tendrils of organic technology descended toward the Villani worlds, seeking to envelop entire continents and lift their populations into space. Human dreadnoughts moved to intercept, their particle beam weapons slicing through the organic structures with brutal efficiency. But for every tendril they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The biomechanical ships were regenerating damage faster than it could be inflicted. Admiral called Dr. Vasquez over the communication network. I'm analyzing the biological components of their ships. They're using the same quantum entanglement technology as the Crimson Death. If we can disrupt that communication. Do it, Chen ordered. All ships with quantum disruption capability coordinate with Dr. Vasquez. Target their communication networks. Meanwhile, the second alien fleet, the sleek artificial intelligence vessels, had begun deploying a different strategy. Instead of physical harvest mechanisms, they were transmitting some kind of neural override signal directly to the infected Villani population. Ambassador Kithara watched in horror from her orbital station as millions of her people began walking calmly toward collection points, their minds apparently under alien control. The Crimson Death had left them vulnerable to mental manipulation. Hegemony forces, she transmitted desperately. Can your gravitational disruptors interfere with neural control signals? Supreme Commander Vorthake's response was immediate. Negative. But our jamming technology might be effective. All hegemony ships deploy neural static generators. Full spectrum interference. The combined human and hegemony efforts began to show results. The biomechanical ships found their regeneration systems disrupted by quantum interference, while the AI fleet's mental control signals were being blocked by hegemony jamming technology. But it was the third alien fleet that proved to be the most dangerous. Their impossible ships began to phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. Worse, they seemed to be directly manipulating the fabric of space-time around the Villani worlds. They're creating spatial distortions, reported the Villani chief scientist over the communication network. If they continue, they'll collapse our entire solar system into a singularity. Admiral Chen realized they were facing an enemy that could literally erase star systems from existence. Human technology was advanced, but it operated within the known laws of physics. These beings seemed to exist outside such constraints. Dr. Vasquez, she called urgently, please tell me you have some insight into how to fight enemies that can manipulate space-time. The xenobiologist's voice was tense with concentration. Admiral, I've been studying the interaction patterns between all three fleets. They're not separate species. They're different aspects of the same civilization. Biomechanical for resource collection, artificial intelligence for population control, and space-time manipulation for system control. So we're fighting one enemy with three different technological approaches, Chun concluded. Exactly. But that gives us an advantage. They're designed to work together, which means they have synchronized vulnerabilities. If we can identify the coordination mechanism. Dr. Vasquez's words were interrupted by a new development. Deep within the Villani worlds, something was responding to the alien harvest attempts. The Crimson Death itself was beginning to evolve again, but this time in unexpected ways. Instead of spreading and killing, the pathogen was beginning to form complex structures within the infected populations. Crystalline networks were growing throughout the Villani cities, creating a web of interconnected consciousness that spanned entire continents. Ambassador, Dr. Vasquez called excitedly, the pathogen is fighting back against its creators. The infected Villani are becoming part of a collective intelligence that's resisting the harvest operations. Ambassador Kithara felt a surge of hope mixed with horror. Her people were being transformed into something beyond their original biology, but they were also gaining the power to resist their would-be captors. Can we communicate with this collective? She asked. I'm trying. The quantum entanglement network is still active, but now it's under Villani control rather than alien control. As if summoned by their conversation, a new voice joined the communication network. It was recognizably Villani in its basic patterns, but transformed by the collective consciousness of millions of linked minds. We are the Villani. We were dying, but now we are becoming. The harvesters seek to claim us, but we refuse their grasp. Will you stand with us against those who would make us slaves?" Admiral Chun felt a moment of profound awe. The Crimson Death had been intended as a tool of subjugation, but the Villani had somehow turned it into a weapon of liberation. They had transcended their original biology to become something new and powerful. "We stand with you," she replied without hesitation. "Tell us how we can help." The collective Villani consciousness responded immediately. The Harvester's coordination depends on a central command nexus located outside normal spacetime. We can show you where it is, but reaching it will require passage through dimensional barriers that only the most advanced technology can breach. Supreme Commander Vorthake's voice joined the conversation, his tone filled with reluctant admiration. Human technology appears capable of such a feat the hegemony will provide covering fire. What followed was the most audacious military operation in galactic history. Human ships equipped with experimental dimensional drive technology prepared to punch through the barriers of space-time itself, while hegemony and transformed Villani forces engaged the three alien fleets in desperate holding actions. Admiral Chun personally led the dimensional assault, taking Terra's Hope and 5 other dreadnoughts into a realm where the normal laws of physics no longer applied. What they found there defied description, a vast construct that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, surrounded by the collective consciousness of thousands of harvested species. The central command nexus was both beautiful and terrifying, a crystalline structure the size of a moon that pulsed with the combined thoughts and memories of civilizations that had been consumed across the galaxy. The aliens who had built it were nowhere to be seen. They had become one with their creation, their individual identities lost in the pursuit of cosmic domination. "All ships, target the central core," Chun ordered. "Maximum firepower, all weapons." The human weapons that had proven so effective against conventional enemies seemed almost ineffective against the dimensional construct. But as they fired, something unexpected happened. The collective consciousness of the harvested species began to respond, their trapped minds recognizing the humans as potential liberators. One by one, the imprisoned civilizations began to break free from their alien captors, their combined will overwhelming the control systems that had held them for millennia. The command nexus began to collapse as its living components rejected their enslavement. Back in normal space, the three alien fleets suddenly found themselves cut off from their central coordination. Without the guiding intelligence of the command nexus, their ships began to malfunction and drift aimlessly through space. The biomechanical vessels' regeneration systems failed, leaving them vulnerable to sustained fire from human and hegemony weapons. The artificial intelligence fleet's coordination protocols collapsed, causing their ships to fire on each other in confusion. The space-time manipulation vessels simply vanished, apparently retreating to whatever impossible realm had spawned them. As the immediate threat ended, the various fleets found themselves facing a new reality. The Villani Confederation had been transformed into something unprecedented, a collective consciousness that spanned 7 worlds and possessed technologies that combined biological evolution with quantum mechanics. "The harvest is ended," announced the collective Villani voice. "We thank you, humans of Terra, for your courage in responding to our call for aid. We thank you, hegemony forces, for your willingness to defend life despite your harsh methods. And we thank the liberated civilizations who chose freedom over servitude." Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope, looking out at the Villani worlds that now glowed with bioluminescent networks spanning entire continents. The humanitarian mission had succeeded, but not in any way they could have anticipated. Ambassador Kithura, she transmitted to the collective consciousness, "What will your people do now?" The response came with the wisdom of a species that had been forced to evolve beyond its original limitations. "We will remember what we were, embrace what we have become, and ensure that no other species suffers the fate we escaped." The harvesters are not gone. They are merely defeated. Others will come. And when they do, the galaxy must be ready. Supreme Commander Vorthay Case final transmission carried a tone of grudging respect that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. The hegemony acknowledges the effectiveness of your intervention, humans. Perhaps there is wisdom in your methods that we had not previously considered. As the human fleet prepared to depart Volani space, Dr. Elena Vasquez transmitted her final report to Earth. The monitoring station that had first detected the Volani distress call would need to be expanded into a full research facility. The galaxy had shown them wonders and terrors that required constant vigilance. But the most important discovery was not technological or biological. It was the realization that when different species set aside their prejudices and worked together, they could accomplish things that none of them could achieve alone. The SOS that the Volani had sent seeking aid from their allies had indeed brought help. Not from the allies they expected, but from strangers who chose to become friends in the face of impossible odds. The Deathworlders' deadly fleet had arrived not to conquer, but to protect. And in doing so, they had forged alliances that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. The rescue mission was complete, but the real work of building a galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination was just beginning. And at the heart of it all was a simple principle that humanity had carried to the stars. When someone calls for help, you answer, no matter who they are, no matter where they are, and no matter what it costs. The galaxy would never be the same.